At 2:11 a.m., a terrified neighbor called the police reporting a single, sharp scream coming from the house across the street. It wasn't the kind of scream you hear from a drunken argument or a bad dream. It was the kind that makes the hair on your arms rise, brief, panicked, and cut off abruptly. When the officers arrived minutes later, the entire home was silent, too silent. The family who lived there had vanished. One plate of food still sat warm on the dining table, a chair was knocked over on its side, and a cell phone lay cracked on the floor. Playing on repeat, a recorded voice message that said, "If anyone hears this, don't trust him." The man who made the call, 41-year-old Brent Miller, stood on his walkway shaking so badly he could barely hold his own phone. Brent lived in a quiet cul-de-sac in Pine Hollow, a coastal town that never made the news for anything other than fishing tournaments and summer markets. He was the quiet type, a handyman, divorced, often seen sitting alone on his porch at night, smoking and staring at the dark street as if waiting for something. His neighbors assumed he was simply lonely, but that night he became the only witness to something far worse than loneliness. Across the street lived the Mora family: Clara, a kindergarten teacher known for her soft voice; Elias, a construction worker who left for his shift before sunrise; and their teenage daughter, Sophie, who walked her dog every afternoon around the block. They were well-liked, always polite, the kind of family people described as normal, without realizing how fragile that word really was. Brent had stepped outside for a cigarette after waking from a nightmare. He often told himself those dreams came from stress or from too much late-night TV, but tonight he felt something different, a pressure in the air, a weight. The street looked wrong somehow, too still, as if the whole world had paused and forgotten to breathe. He inhaled deeply and looked toward the Mora house. Their living room light was still on, unusual for that hour. He squinted, wondering if someone couldn't sleep. And then it happened. A scream, a single piercing scream, a young woman's voice, Sophie's voice, he was sure of it. Then came the thud, a heavy final sound like someone collapsing or being pushed or falling against a table. Brent dropped his cigarette. He froze for 3 full seconds, his heart pounding against his ribs, before running inside to grab his phone. The 911 call lasted less than 20 seconds, just long enough for him to gasp the words, "My neighbor's house." Someone screamed, "Something's wrong. Please hurry." 4 minutes later, officers arrived. Brent watched them from the curb, his breath fogging in the cold air. He expected chaos, broken glass, something obvious. But the Mora house looked undisturbed, peaceful, except for the small, eerie detail that the front door was partially open, slowly swaying in the night breeze. The officers announced themselves and stepped inside. Brent stayed frozen near his mailbox, hugging himself, unable to look away. What the officers found made no sense at all. The dining room table was set for 3, food still warm, plates half full, nothing knocked over except one chair, positioned as if someone had stood up in a rush. The house smelled like garlic and butter. Music still played quietly from a smart speaker in the corner, an acoustic playlist Sophie often used while studying. There was no blood, no shattered objects, no torn clothing, no sign of forced entry, but the family was gone. The only clue was the cell phone on the floor, screen cracked, replaying the same chilling message on a loop. "If anyone hears this, don't trust him." Detective Rafael Torres arrived 30 minutes later with forensic techs, Izzy and Marcone. Rafael was known for noticing small inconsistencies that others missed, and as he walked through the house, something bothered him immediately. "This wasn't a struggle," he murmured. "This was an interruption." Izzy, crouched near the table, pointed at the dishes. "The food is still warm. 15, maybe 20 minutes at most. They were eating when something happened." On the couch, Sophie's phone was found. One unread message from a contact named Unknown3 said, "I'm outside. Don't tell your parents." The message was sent 5 minutes before Brent heard the scream. Rafael studied the text. Teenagers had secrets, sneaking out, crushes, late-night walks. But something about the phrasing didn't feel like a friend. It felt like someone much older, someone confident, someone who knew Sophie wouldn't show this to her parents. Downstairs, the basement held the first undeniable sign of violence. The inside of the basement door was scratched deeply, the wood splintered. Someone had tried to claw their way out, desperately. And on the 3rd step, Izzy found a torn piece of red hoodie fabric. "Sophie owns one, just like this," she whispered. Rafael went back outside to speak with Brent again. The neighbor stood with his arms crossed, trying to steady himself, clearly replaying the scream in his mind. But as soon as Raphael asked about the mud on Brent's shoes, mud from the wooded trail behind both houses, Brent started to stammer. He insisted he hadn't left the porch, then claimed he went to buy groceries late at night, then changed the time, then changed it again. His story didn't add up, but Raphael could tell Brent wasn't lying to cover up guilt. He was lying because he was afraid, terrified. Behind the Moore house, the team found flattened patches of grass and clear drag marks leading toward the back gate. They saw 3 sets of footprints, one corresponding to Clara, one to Elias, and one smaller, likely Sophie's. But next to them was a 4th footprint, large, heavy, from a man wearing industrial work boots. No one in the Moore household wore boots like that. The tracks led into the woods. There, deep tire marks indicated a large truck had driven through recently, heavy enough to sink deeply into the wet ground. The maintenance road there had been abandoned for years, but its path led directly to the old water treatment plant north of town, shut down 7 years earlier after a fatal accident. At the entrance to the maintenance road, the team found a small cassette tape wrapped in plastic tape. Written on it, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Play me." Marcone placed it in a handheld cassette player. Static filled the air. Then a whisper, Clara's voice trembling with terror. "We're in the dark. He took us. Don't let him turn the water on." Izzy's face went pale. "The lower tanks can flood in seconds if the valves are opened." They rushed to the plant. The water treatment building looked like a skeleton of rusted metal and broken pipes. The wind moaned through cracks in the walls. Inside, the echo of dripping water made it impossible to judge distance. As they advanced, a sound rose from somewhere ahead, a soft, repeating cry. It was Sophie, or so they thought. When they followed the sound through 3 corridor turns, they found a portable recorder hidden behind a stack of old pipes, looping the audio of Sophie's cries. "He's leading us," Raphael muttered. "He wants us to walk right where he can see us." They advanced cautiously through the maze of metal, concrete, and underground chambers. Finally, in a locked room on the 2nd sublevel, they heard a real voice, weak, trembling. Sophie was found on the floor, tied, dehydrated, but alive. Her cheeks were streaked with dirt and tears. When she saw Izzy enter the room, she broke into sobs. He said we had to drown, like she did." As Izzy comforted the girl, Raphael stepped into the corner of the chamber and saw him. A man in filthy dark overalls, boots stained with mud and grease, eyes hollow and unfocused. He held a rusted metal wrench tightly in his hand. His long, unkempt hair hung over his face. But through the tangles, his eyes stared at Raphael with wild intensity. His old employee badge lay on the floor. R. Hawthorne, lead technician, a man who had disappeared the same day his daughter died in a tank accident 7 years earlier. Hawthorne stepped forward slowly, almost calmly. "You shouldn't have come," he said. "You won't hear them in time." Raphael raised his weapon. "Where are the parents?" Hawthorne tapped a large control panel with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "If I turn the water on, you'll hear them." He lunged, swinging the wrench. The metal reverberated as it struck a pipe inches from Raphael's shoulder. The fight was intense. Hawthorne was stronger than expected. Desperate strength, fueled by grief and madness. It took both Raphael and Marcone to bring him down. Finally, Marcone struck him across the jaw with a fire extinguisher, and Hawthorne collapsed. Sophie directed them to a lower chamber beneath the plant. Raphael, Izzy, and Marcone pried open the hatch and descended into a cold, echoing room partially lit by emergency lights. Clara and Elias were tied back to back, but alive. Clara couldn't stop shaking as she was freed. "He said we took something from him," she whispered, "but we never even knew who he was." Hawthorne's motive became clear when Izzy reviewed old files. His daughter had drowned during a mechanical failure in the same plant years earlier. He had blamed the town, the company, and anyone who lived near his former home, including people like the Moras. Even though they moved in long after the accident, he had never left the plant after the shutdown. He lived in the shadows of the abandoned structure, watching, waiting for someone to blame. As the family was rushed into ambulances, Brent approached Raphael again. His voice broke. "I told you I wasn't crazy. I heard her. I knew something was wrong." Raphael placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing. If you hadn't called, they would have never been found." Brent stared at the water plant, the building looming against the early morning sky. "He was living in there? All this time?" Raphael nodded. "Some monsters don't hide under beds. They hide in the places we forget." As dawn spread across Pine Hollow, painting the sky in pale orange, Raphael looked back at the silent plant. The rusted tanks, the broken windows, the long shadow stretching across the earth. Some places should never be abandoned, because darkness doesn't disappear when the lights are turned off. Sometimes that's when it finally wakes up.